Hello. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at section 3.6 in the textbook, which is converting between percent and decimal format. In the last section, we took a look at converting between fractions and decimals, so I'd encourage you to go back and take a look at that section. And in that video, we talked about the fact that fraction, percent, and decimal are just three ways of looking at the same kinds of numbers, numbers that are either less than one or parts of one whole. In this section, we'll be converting between percent and decimal format, and that's an incredibly important conversion. We're going to be doing that throughout this class, and you'll be doing that again quite a bit in Math 101. It's such an important conversion that I strongly encourage you to really practice this so that you have it down fluidly. Let's take a look at the process and rules for doing this. First up, we'll convert from a percent to a decimal format. Taking a look at this first number, 1.5%, we're asked to convert that percent to a decimal number. How do we do that? Well, percent literally means out of 100. Cent, well, how many cents are in a dollar? 100. Per means out of. So we're going to make that out of 100. Just divide by 100 to get the answer. Now, dividing by 100 is actually really easy to do without a calculator. All you have to do is move the decimal point. When you're dividing by 100, you move the decimal point 2 spaces to the left. So to convert a percent to a decimal, you will always move the decimal point 2 spaces to the left. In this case, I'm going to rewrite it 1.5. I can drop the percent sign, and I'm going to move that decimal point from here. Once to the left puts me in front of the 1. I kind of scooped under the 1 there. If I want to move a second time to the left, there's no number to move under, so I have to put a placeholder 0 here. And my decimal point will go right here. So it becomes 0.015. I moved that decimal point twice to the left. Now if you want to, you can put another 0 to the left of that decimal point since there's no whole number there, but you don't have to. That's a matter of style. Some people like it, some people don't. 0.015 is a perfectly acceptable answer. To remember that you're moving to the left when you're converting to a decimal, just think if I'm converting to a decimal ends in L, so I move to the left. I didn't make that up. A student of mine tipped me off to it, and I think it's a neat trick. Alright, let's try this one out. 18%. So I'm going to take my 18. Well, hold on a second. This one doesn't have a decimal. So how do I do it? If you don't see a decimal point in a number, it starts out life at the far right. That's a good thing to remember. 18, since it's a whole number, is going to be completely to the left of the decimal point. So my decimal point starts out life at the far right of the number. And I still have to move it to 2 places to the left. So I'm going to take my decimal, I'm going to move it once, it goes past the 8, and then twice, it goes past the 1. I don't need a placeholder 0 now because each time I moved it, it moved past a number. So 0.18 will be my final answer. And again, you can put that 0 to the left or you can just leave it as 0.18. The Hawk software will actually accept either answer. Alright, what about the other way, converting a decimal back to a percent? Well, as you can imagine, you just do the exact opposite. You're going to multiply the number by 100, or move the decimal point 2 spaces to the right. I like to just think about it as moving the decimal place twice to the right. It's easy to do. You don't need a calculator for this. And again, another way to remember which way to move is think if you're converting to a percent, because percent has R in it, you're moving to the right. So let's take my number, 0.09. It's 9/100ths if you want to write it formally. And I'm going to take my decimal point and move it twice, in this case, to the right. So once past the 0, twice past the 9, and it ends up right here. Now if I were just to write that out as is, I'd have 009 and then a decimal point. That's kind of awkward looking, isn't it? Those zeros to the left of the 9 were placeholders, but I don't need them anymore because they're not holding any place. So I can get rid of those zeros. I don't have to write them. And this decimal point is to the far right of a number, so I can drop that as well. Remember, any whole number that doesn't have a decimal point, you assume the decimal point's to the far right. So if you have a number where the decimal point's to the far right, you can drop it and just assume it's the same whole number. So my final answer here would just be 9, and don't forget the percent sign. For the Hawks homework assignments, sometimes they'll give the percent sign to you in the final answer. They'll have that right next to the answer box, and sometimes they won't. So just watch out for it. If they ask you for a percent and they don't put a percent symbol, you probably should put it. All right. I have 2 questions below here that are slightly tricky ones. I want you to give these a try. And actually do it this time if you haven't been hitting pause and trying these out. This is a good set of questions to do just to test your knowledge. So go ahead and hit pause and try these 2 questions out, and then we'll resume and see if we got the same answer. All right, did you hit the pause button and try those out? Let's take a look. Convert 0.023% to a decimal. Now be honest, how many of you were tempted to write 2.3 as the answer? That looks right and it feels right, but it's not. And here's why. I'm converting this number to a decimal, which means I need to move that decimal point to the left. So 0.023. I'm going to take the decimal point and move it twice to the left, which means once past this 0, and then another time, and I have to put a placeholder 0 in to keep that spot. So my final answer will be 0.00023. It looks awkward, it looks funny, but it's correct. So you can't always go with your gut, you can't always move the decimal point where it feels like it ought to go. You have to follow those rules. Just let that be a lesson to you, because that's an easy mistake to make, and I see people make that mistake quite frequently. And if you think you're never going to see a decimal or a percent that's as funny as 0.023%, when we get to compound interest, you definitely will. All right, next up, convert 158.3 to a percent. Again, I'm trying to pull the same trick on you. It's tempting to move that decimal point to the left, because that's where it seems like it ought to go. But we're converting to a percent. Move that thing to the right. So I'm going to take my decimal point, and I'm going to move it once and then twice to the right. And that second time, I'm going to need to put in a placeholder 0, because there's no number to move past. So 15830, 15,830% will be my final answer. Those were slightly tricky ones, but it's important to make sure that you're following the rules precisely. So to summarize, converting between percent and decimal format is pretty straightforward. You're just moving the decimal place twice. When converting to a decimal, move the decimal point twice to the left. When converting to a percent, move the decimal place twice to the right. If you don't see a decimal point in a number, it starts out life at the far right of that number. This is a super important conversion, so please make sure to practice this one since it's going to come up again and again.